Well, back United States again. I've come back from Europe, from Poland and from the UK, and back where I love it. I mean, just look at this day. I mean, just take a look at the surrounding here. Back at my favorite stream. There's some rapids. There's a guy fishing right down there. It's a gorgeous day here in Pennsylvania on the East Coast. You can see everything's green now. Blue sky. I mean, what a beautiful environment to be talking and to be sharing my material with you. And we've been going through all this internal critique of the Qur'an. I did some there in Poland. I also continued in London. And I'll be going back to Europe again. We'll be doing some other ones further later on. But right now, we want to continue that idea. And I want to bring back the Mishkat al-Masabih. Remember earlier in one of the episodes, I quoted from the Mishkat al-Masabih, which is what Muslims use, and it's what they always point to define what their Quran is. Let me just read it to you again, just to remind you. And it says this in the Mishkat al-Masabih, volume 3, page 664. The Quran is the greatest wonder among the wonders of the world. This book is second to none in the world according to the unanimous decision of the learned men in points of diction, style, rhetoric, thoughts, and soundness of laws, regulations to shape the destinies of mankind. So you get all these points, claim after claim after claim after claim. They raise the Quran so high that it's very easy then to knock it down. And Muslims need to be careful, because the more they make claims for the Quran, the easier it's going to be for us to confront them. I remember when I was at Speaker's Corner, people used to always ask me, why is it you only go up 2 steps? You only have a 2-step ladder. Why don't you have a 3 or 4 or 5 so you can get higher above the crowd? Because the crowds would get so big. And I said, listen, the higher you go, when they knock me off, the further I fall. And in a sense, this is the problem with the Mishkat al-Masabih. It makes so many claims about the Quran, and it's not the only one. Muslims quote that all the time. I hear it from Muslims. They're always telling me that this is why the Quran is superior to any other. That's why they quote from chapter 10 when they say to produce a surah like it. They're so sure that there's nothing that can equal this book. Nothing at all. And so, since they put it so high, since they make these claims, we're going to confront it, and we're going to have to look at especially this idea that it is so high that it is co-equal with God. It is co-eternal with God. In chapter 85, verse 22, that's internal to the Quran. The Quran makes that claim for itself. So it has almost a divine status, and we talked about that in an earlier episode. Now here's the questions. Dr. Carl Pfander, the man that from the 1800s, the 19th century, who I did my doctoral thesis on, looking at his apologetics and polemics, he used to confront the Quran on this very notion. And he would say much the same thing. He would ask much the same question that I'm asking right now. And he'd say, when you look at the Quran, when you look at the Arabic within it, only Arab speakers would make this claim that it is the greatest of all Arab books. And we're going to talk about that in yet another episode, because we're going to confront that notion as well. But he says when you take the Quran outside of Arabic and when you put it into another language, the eloquence is lost. It's just not there. You don't find this eloquence in English or any other language. And that's why when you look at the Quran, when you have the translation here, take a look at the English. It's very archaic. It's a kind of Victorian English that they use. And I guess the translators think that by housing in that kind of English, it somehow will elevate it in the minds of English readers. They do that with also other languages. It doesn't help, because it makes it even more difficult to understand for the English reader. And that's why when I asked many Muslims, have they read the Quran even in English, they said, we've tried to, but we can't even understand what it's saying, because it's just highfalutin, very archaic material, English that was used 100 to 200 years ago. Now, but here's the question I have, and this is something that Pfander asks, and I would carry it on from there. If you're going to claim that this book, because of its eloquence, because of its superiority to every other piece of literature, if that is so, then what are you going to do with other pieces of literature that are greater than this in content, greater than this in eloquence, greater than this in style? This is not the greatest book of style. Please, no, Muslim, don't even make that claim, because you're going to be shot right out of the auditorium when you make that kind of claim in any public venue. Please don't even make that claim. Nonetheless, if you do make that claim, you're going to have to come up and ask, what about the other books that are greater as far as style, greater as far as content? Should we then say that because they're greater than the Quran in style, are they then divine? Are you going to give them the same accolades that you give to the Quran? Or what about spurious books, books that are fraudulent, but they're very eloquent? They're well written. There are many books that are fraudulent that are well written. Because of their eloquence and because they're well written and because they're popular, should we therefore give them a divine status? Can you see the difficulty with the claims you make? More about that. What about the stories within the Quran that are borrowed? And there are many. We're going to be opening up and actually looking at many of these borrowed stories. What about those borrowed stories? If they are borrowed, do they have a divine status in the fact that they have now made their way into this book? That's the question you need to ask, because if that's the case, then you've got a whole nother litany of difficulties, because then you've got the problem of looking at those borrowed stories and claiming many of them, and if you take a look at them, they are apocryphal writings. These are Jewish apocryphal writings. These were nothing more than folk tales, bedtime tales for children. You're going to state that those, therefore, are also divine? And see, this is the problem when you make a claim. Once you make that claim, you're going to have to defend it, stand by it, but look at all the ramifications because of it. What's fascinating is when you look at the historical, and we're going to get into the historical in a whole nother series of episodes, the historical problems with that assumption. This book, even the claims about this book by al-Bukhari. Remember al-Bukhari in volume 6, hadith number 509 and 510. Al-Bukhari even makes the claim, when you look there, that this book was first written by Zayd ibn Thabit under the auspices of Abu Bakr and Umar. And then 20 years later, roughly 20 years later, under the auspices of Uthman, he then had to rewrite it again. So which one of those Qurans, the first or the second compilation, is the divine one? Which one is the eloquent one? Which one is the wonders of the world? But more than that, take a look and see, this book is not even from that time period. This book, what we have in our hands today, the Arabic here, does not come from the 7th century. It does not even come from the 8th century. As we're going to see, and we get into the historical critique, it was finally compiled and canonized in 1924, 95 years ago. So is that the Quran that's the wonder of the wonders of the world? But the Mishkat al-Masabih was written in the 8th and 9th century. Is it referring to something that was yet to be recreated in the 20th century? Can you see the problems that exist when you make claims like this? And I'm just bringing this up because these are things that Muslims need to answer, and I want you to answer. Don't just walk away from this video. Don't just go away and make all your ad hominems against me, the person. Go and answer the questions. Write in the comments below. I've noticed Muslims are not writing as much anymore. I think that because we're turning the screws a little harder than they're used to, and they don't like these kind of screws to be turned. But we're asking perfectly legitimate questions about your Quran. Don't just sit there and make these claims. Support it. Defend them. Help us to understand why you're making these claims, and help us to see how you can defend them. Okay. Here in beautiful Pennsylvania at my favorite stream. Can you hear the water just rushing over this rapids right here? Just gorgeous. This is Jathan. Over and out.